Clinton, thanks so much for taking some time to come on the show.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
I have never been part of a phonathon. I've never set one up. I've never been part of one in any organizations I've worked with. I've been on the receiving end of a few, and that's why you're on the show. When organizations want to create a phonathon, you're the guy they call to come in and help them figure it out. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So let's just start here. What is a phonathon?
Oh my gosh, a phonathon is really where you're reaching out to your constituents, whether they be donors or non-donors, whether they be friends, whether they be members, whatever your database is made up of, via phone and chatting those folks up. And phonathons can take all sorts of different sort of forms, whether they be fundraising, whether they be engagement, whether they be just informational. So that
Gotcha.
is the sort of the base level of what a phonathon is.
Yeah. So in that mix, in the fundraising, informational stewardship, what is the most common purpose that organizations use a phonathon for?
Mostly for fundraising.
Okay. So we're calling up donors and we're going to ask them to be either renew a gift or be part of this mission or be part of a special project. So most of the time we're doing this to try to get to reach out to donors, build relationship and rapport, but also to get a gift.
Correct. And there are phonathons out there that call non-donors. So people who have never given before, but they're in the database somehow. And so let's try and engage them. Let's try and chat them up. Let's try and hear what they love about the institution. And while we have you on the phone, let's give you an opportunity to join others in making a gift.
Right. I want to get into how to set one of these up for somebody who's listening who's never done one, and this sounds intriguing. Before we do, it seems like phonathons, it seems like our colleagues in the higher ed space, maybe in membership organizations, it seems like they've really got it figured out. It seems like they're the ones who make use of phonathons the most. I know that's a large portion of organizations you work with. But for those of us who don't work in that space, it seems like that's one of those things that we can really learn from the higher ed space. How do you see that?
I absolutely. Higher ed sort of has the formula down. They've got access to plentiful labor, i.e., a campus full of college students.
Right.
There's usually not a problem finding at least some sort of space or classroom during an evening time where we can set up some laptops and make some outgoing phone calls. So they've got the space, they've got the labor, and that really knocks out a lot of what's needed with a phonathon.
Right. Our phonathons, let's say we don't have this huge alumni base, but let's say we would be able to get people together to do this with us. Volunteers, past owners, board members. Are they a good investment?
It depends on how you define ROI. So, first of all, if you are looking to have a two-way dialogue with your constituent base, phonathons, hands down, are the way to go. More than an event, more than other in-person touch points, a phonathon is going to have access to be able to create that back and forth conversation more than any other outreach channel, if you will. So yes, it's a wonderful investment on that level. Now, if you're looking to cover your costs and raise what the phonathon, expenditure outlay was, well, that's where it starts. You've got to start looking at: do you just call your donors, and do you not call non-donors? Do you call your folks that are more likely to give, or are you willing to invest in having a conversation with folks, even if they're not going to give, to try and build that relationship and build a tighter connection?
Right. So I want to put myself in the shoes of somebody who's listening to this podcast who may have never run a phonathon either at their nonprofit, but it might be something that they want to consider, and so they may get some of their key people around the room. They may sit down and be like, okay, let's evaluate whether this is a good idea, whether we can pull it off, whether it makes sense for organization. Where do we start?
So first of all, you've got to make sure that you've got a database that's callable. If you don't have good phone numbers, that kills the project right there. So do we have a database that is full of, at least to the best of our knowledge, good phone numbers? Have we done research? Have we sent it out to get scrubbed? Have we done due diligence on that end? And then you've got to make the decision of, do you want to invest in an automated software where you're going to load the data in, and then your callers are going to call from that software, and you're going to input the information into the computer, and it's going to help you spit out emails, it's going to help you spit out text messages, it's going to help you track on reporting? Or are you going to go old school, and are you going to dump all of this into an Excel sheet and print it out and give Bob his sheet for the night and Mary her sheet for the night, and they make some phone calls? So you've got to figure out, run the cost benefit analysis on that. Do you have the resources to do that? Do you have the space? In an ideal world, and COVID has taught us that pretty much anything is possible remotely, but in an ideal world, we'd love to have people in the same room. The synergy, the energy, just the back and forth that the callers can get from each other,
Right.
and hearing, oh my gosh, I love how you talked about that, or I love how you phrased that. That happens, of course, so much more organically than if we're all sitting on a Zoom on mute, watching each other call from our dining rooms.
That makes total sense to me. From my days running radiothons, when you would be on the radio for whatever 20 hours, and like people would call in, having all the volunteers in the same room completely changed the dynamic, because you need the encouragement from other people. You need to see how other people, they get off the phone and they say, "Oh my goodness, I just got a $10,000 gift," and they're almost in tears, and then everybody's ecstatic, right?
Right.
In radiothons, you also want phones ringing in the background. There's social proof there that like there's action and other people are donating.
Absolutely.
But that makes total sense. Have you run phonathons during COVID, just everybody being at home?
Absolutely. And a way overused word, but pivot. There were some schools out there that absolutely shut down fundraising and shut down outreach. They didn't want to overstep. And to be candid, some of those schools and other nonprofits shut down fundraising for too long.
Yeah.
Those that continued to tell their story and share their mission and continue to give people an opportunity to make a gift, they thrived, and they did so much better during COVID. But yes, we just had callers who were calling from their parents' basement, if we're talking about higher education, or calling from their homes, or wherever the case may be, and continued that outreach.
Yeah. So if we're going to give this a try, would you suggest just starting with the Excel sheet and giving everybody their numbers before investing in software?
I absolutely would. Yeah. Walk before you run.
Okay. All right. So I'm thinking, again, I'm thinking this through. Okay, we're gonna get Excel sheets. We're gonna we have callable numbers. How many people do we need to pull this off? And are we going to use staff? Are we going to use volunteers? Do we need to give them a bunch of training? What's the next step? So we've got callable numbers. We know what the system is going to be. What's the next step?
The next step is to get callers. And in an ideal world, you would hire part-time staff. And you would actually hire staff to come in to be dedicated to this position. It does not mean that there cannot be a successful phonathon with staff members who are volunteering their time, but most of those staff members have already worked a long day. Most of those staff members tend to be on salary, and getting volunteers to commit over a long-term period of time, even if that long-term is just 2 weeks, that can be difficult. And lastly, with volunteers, as you have them coming in and out, you've got to retrain and train all of the new folks. So if I'm, working only 2 nights over the next 10 nights, that's a whole lot of folks that I've got to train every evening. Whereas if I've got a dedicated group that's going to help me, I get to train them once and set them loose.
Right. And also sort of gain incremental improvements, right? If you're working with the same folks, you can see, oh, okay, looks like, John over here needs a bit more encouragement in this area. And you can actually help them be more successful.
Yeah, the calls that you make on your third night are almost exponentially better than the calls you make your second night, which are exponentially better than the calls you make your first night. This is very much a practice makes perfect type project. And so the more we can get our same staff doing this over and over that period of time, the better.
Are we making this a sort of a continuous business process where we've got part-time staff who are basically doing a phonathon all year round? Or is this kind of a blitz where we come in, we say these this week, these 2 weeks, these 3 weeks, or whatever, maybe this month leading up to Thanksgiving, whatever it is. Are we setting it up that way, or is this like a continuous process that just happens in the background?
That's a great question. I would start it out as a blitz. And then if you get traction and you have the ability to keep staff, then you can look at elongating it. But when you are trying to run the phonathon, staffing is going to be your number one sort of pain point.
Okay.
And that was even before the pandemic and the Great Resignation and everything else. And so our ability to keep staff for 2 weeks or a month is going to be much easier than trying to keep staff, over 40 or 50 or 52 weeks.
Right. Okay, so let's say we've decided to do a test. We're going to do it the old school way, just give phone numbers to people. Let's say we've got enough phone numbers in the system, and we figured out a way to have some staff who we can have for a few weeks. Here in Canada, we've got a great summer student program where the government will subsidize some of their salary, and you can apply for that. And so a lot of organizations use the summer to do extra stewardship efforts because they're able to hire all these young people who are in college. So let's say we figured out something like that. We're going to have a group that we can have to do a blitz for at least a few weeks. And let's say we're going to make the focus on fundraising. Generally speaking, I know these are broad questions because we're not talking about a specific donor file, but generally speaking, if we're fundraising, are we trying to re-engage lapsed donors? Are we trying to upgrade giving? Are we trying to convert to a monthly gift? What are some of the core strategies, not advanced strategies, just like core strategies we can start with?
Well, I guess that has to be answered by what are the goals of the program? What are you looking to get out of it? Are you looking to build your donor base? Are you looking to build the foundation of the giving pyramid? If that's the case, then your asks are going to be very modest and they're going to be very attainable. And so you've got sort of that lens that you can look through. Are you looking for dollars? Does your organization need money? In that case, you're going to be calling your more recent donors, so your Libents and your Cybents, and you're going to be doing upgrade asks.
Right.
And so if they gave $100 last year, you're going to be asking for $250.
Yeah.
And then, of course, if you're just looking to engage your folks and you're just looking to have a conversation with your folks, and the money is just an extra bonus, but really that's not the core of the program. Of
Right.
course, then going for a smaller, more attainable ask is certainly the way to go.
Right. Can you just clarify Libens and Cybens for people who are
Thank
listening
you.
who
Thank you.
may not be familiar
Acronyms.
with that language? Yeah.
So last year, but unfortunately not this, would be a Libent. And then a Cybent is some year, but unfortunately not this. Most organizations call Libents their previous fiscal year donors.
Yeah.
And their Cybents, most organizations, while they've got their own business rules, go out 3 to 5 years worth of giving.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And some call those deep lapsed, some call those recently lapsed.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. So, okay, we got the staff. We have a goal. Let's say that we want to sort of build a broad base of donors, but we're not calling for acquisition. We're calling people who are already in our database. Generally speaking, what makes for a good offer on the phone? As in, like, are there some offers that are just like better to not try on the phone? Are we just asking for a one-time gift suited for that person's sort of giving history? Are we asking for like an urgent gift, like something that's going on right now? Yeah, just walk us through what might be a good offer and what might not work as an offer.
So it's less about the offer because the gifts are so low level, and just let's just look at the broad scope of things. $100 is not going to put folks into bankruptcy. $100 is not going to clear out a retirement account. So we're not asking for life-changing, life-altering gifts.
Sure.
So the amounts that the phonathon is going to deal with in most instances that's just checkbook money. That's just pocket change, if you will. And folks don't get too specific about where their money is going to go at that level. If I'm going to give $10,000 or $100,000, I'm going to be pretty picky, and I'm going to want to make sure my gift supports XYZ project. If I'm looking to give you $20 or $50, whatever you're asking me to support, sure, I'll give some money. And so I would be less worried about finding the right fit for that specific donor and finding out something that's going to advance the mission of your institution. And you're raising money for that, or your institution's greatest needs. It is okay to say, help us support what we have going on, help us support the future of XYZ organization so we can, be stronger and we can build and we can help, so many more people. And that's a fine ask.
All right, so that's interesting that you say that, and I want to get into that a little bit more.
Sure.
Um, because we're so in direct response, we're always so hyper aware of the offer, even
Yes.
at low level gifts. So the fact that you say on the phone it might not matter as much, that gives me a bit of a like, whoa, okay, I didn't know that. I wouldn't have thought that. So can you talk a little bit more about that? When you're helping your clients develop a messaging or scripts, whatever it is, how do you decide what to ask for?
Again, what are the goals of the organization? We can conjecture on this side, and we can say, oh, someone who majored in business is going to want to give to business.
Mm-hmm.
We can say someone who has a membership to this art museum is going to want to support this program or this exhibit. But at the end of the day, unless we have done a whole lot of research to find out what our donors want, these gifts, even at the lower levels, it's more about the conversation. It's
Gotcha.
more about the connection that you've made on the phone. With direct mail, that is a one-way dialogue.
Yeah.
But if I have the opportunity to share with you what I love about Acme Museum and what I'm passionate about, and I've heard your story, now if I pick up on your story and you are very, very passionate about making sure school children have access to the arts, and regardless of their ability to pay, well, then sure, I'm going to try to funnel my ask to you to something that you've sort of tipped your hand that you're passionate about. But
Right.
if we've just had a conversation about the museum being wonderful and lovely and how great it is to have it in our backyard, I can ask for you to support the museum, and that's a successful ask.
Gotcha. Yeah. Yeah. And our mutual friend and colleague, Clay Buck, was on a podcast a few episodes ago talking about how to have that conversation, like the phone conversation. I
Yeah.
still want to get into it with you a little bit, um, because we are, we're going to have maybe seasonal staff or maybe volunteers. But these are folks that, like you said, when we hire part time staff, they haven't been embedded in our mission for years, which can be both a positive. They don't have this curse of knowledge where they
Right.
assume everybody else knows what they know. But I'm assuming, and correct me if I'm wrong, it can also be a bit of a, they've got to get up to speed and they've got to know how to confidently talk about the place, and they've got to be able to answer some questions, because once you're on the phone, you never know what question a donor might have.
You're absolutely right.
How do you train folks who are going to run this campaign? What are key things we need to consider in the training?
Um, Ooh, that is a $52 million question, and from my vantage point, having been a part of phonathons for 30 years, the most important part of what that caller can bring to the phonathon, I can't train. Do you have a personality? Do you have the gift of gab? Can you create a conversation out of nothing with a complete stranger? If you have that ability, I can put the words into your mouth on how to execute an ask, how to deliver an ask. I can put the words into your mouth about the wonderful things that our mission is accomplishing at the organization. Um, but I can't teach you how to verbally interact with someone over the phone. Either you have that skill or you don't. And so that's what I would think would be the most important part, is finding the right person, and then I can fill in the rest. And let's be honest, I can give bullet points, I can give fast facts, I can give nuggets of information, but I'm never going to train a part-time person, a full-time person, on everything about the
Yeah.
organization. So if they're asked a question that they don't know the answer to, we've got the prospect's phone number. We'll call them
Right.
back the next day after we learn it. So I don't stress about that at all.
All right. I want to go there because the most important part somebody brings to the table is their personality, the gift of gab.
Yes.
Can you build rapport with another human? Are you genuinely interested in that other human? Those are super important things. But how do you screen for those in an interview process?
Oh, I love it. I love it. My interview process, and many others in the field, if you will, is not about necessarily what you're saying. There are folks out there that, well, what do you think of this organization, and what do you love most about it? And
Right.
we're trying to find someone who can, be very effusive about their love of whatever the nonprofit is. Uh, my number one question when I get into the interview, and my very first question is, so tell me about yourself. And then I literally stop talking. And that person who says, okay, what do you want to know? Just tell me about yourself. Well, I was born and raised here, like that type of information. And I'm married and I have two kids and a cat. So yeah, that's about it. They are not getting a job offer. But the person who says, well, all right, so I was, born in this city, and then my parents took me here, and I went to this high school, and I went to this college, and I've been, this job for this number of years, and, I've got three kids, two dogs, and a cat, and just is easy and comfortable to talk with. And while I'm going to use a little hyperbole here, if I'm sitting on the edge of my seat, if I am
Mm,
waiting with bated breath to hear more about them and their story, they've got the job. I
gotcha.
can train to everything else.
If you would be okay being stuck in a corner at a crowded party with this person, if that would be an enjoyable experience.
That's an excellent way to put it.
Okay. Okay, so we're gonna screen for personality, and if I hear you correctly, if we screen for personality, we can train the rest, or we can
Correct.
teach the rest, or we can give them enough tools that they will be successful on the phone.
I mean, as a general rule, of
Yeah,
course, there are exceptions,
broadly
but yes,
speaking. Yeah,
right.
absolutely. Yeah. All right. So we found a bunch of great personalities. All right, we've got these folks. Now we've got to get them onboarded, and we've got to get them calling. What's the next step?
So the onboarding process is really walking them through the steps of the phone call. And while we've got these folks on the phones, let's use that as an opportunity to update and verify the organization's data on them.
Okay.
So,
Yep.
do we have your correct mailing address? Do we have your correct email address, or can we get an email address from you? So that's the first part of the conversation, which then easily just dovetails into, tell me how you're associated with XYZ organization. How long have you been a part of it? And I might have a donor history. I might know that they've given, for the last 20 years, so I know about when they started. But I'm just trying to engage them in conversation, and tell me about yourself,
Yeah.
Ms. Constituent. And then of course I'm sharing about myself and my experiences. And the wonderful part of this conversation is it doesn't have to be around the organization.
Hmm.
A very successful call can happen, and I talk about this in trainings all of the time. I monitored a call, and this has probably been about a decade ago. I was at an institution in Pennsylvania, and the caller heard a dog bark in the background. And this was very early on in the call, and so asked the prospect, oh my gosh, I just heard a dog bark. What kind of dog was it? and I don't even remember to this day, doesn't matter, German Shepherd, let's say, and the caller was like, oh my gosh, well, my parents and we've raised beagles my entire life. 25 minutes go by and they talk about dogs the entire time. The prospect is loving it, the caller is loving it, and the caller then just says, another reason for my call is just to tell you about the great things happening here, and just gave one really quick point about the wonderful things that were happening at the school, and with these thoughts in mind, would you join others in making a gift of $100? And the person said, absolutely. Now, the person may have loved that organization. The person may have had them very, very high on their donor list. But at the end of the day, the person gave to the caller,
Right.
who they had a fabulous connection with. And that caller could have been asking for the Save the Whales Fund. And they would have absolutely given that caller $100, not because they loved whales any more than they loved the organization, but that connection was made, that rapport was built, and then wonderful things happened on the fundraising end because of it.
Right. My slight tangent here. My wife and I are raising these two kiddos, and one of them who sometimes faces some challenges. And so I've been reading a lot of parenting books, and parenting books specifically on connected parenting and attachment. And one of the mantras that keeps coming up is connection before correction. So before you're going to discipline the child for something they've done that they shouldn't have done, there's got to be the correction. But before you do that, you got to connect with them, right? Because then whatever else you do is so much easier. Because now you're eye to eye and you feel connected. So connection before getting into the offer, the ask, whatever it is, that sounds like it's sort of a universal principle that all fundraisers should just be living by.
Well, and I absolutely, I joke with folks that I'm training in this job, and they typically are college student age folks, and I say, okay, let's think about the last time you called and asked someone for money. How many of you have done that in the last year? And of course, hands fly up. And I said, let's say we're going to call mom. Do you get on the phone and say, hey, ma, I need some money? Or do you get on the phone and say, hey, mom, how are you doing? How are things? Oh, here's how classes are going. I've got a bunch of laundry to do. How's Aunt Millie? And then 20 minutes later, oh, by the way, can you give me $100? And so that whole concept, that whole flavor is just how we properly stage a solicitation.
Yeah. So let's get really, really tactical for a second, and that is just around the technology.
Sure.
Do we need to rent a bunch of phones and sort of set up a phone bank? Do we need to, can people just call using their cell phones? Because then their personal name would show up on the donor's phone, not the organization's name. So how do you do this? Just like really practically, how do we set this up?
So if we're working from an office, if we're working from a space that has individual phones, we're calling from them. We do not recommend individuals using their own cell phones,
Yeah.
just because of that. 99% of the time it would be fine. You don't want to go down the road of what that other 1% looks like. So just stay away from that rabbit hole. There are also opportunities with every big name cell phone carrier out there to rent cell phones. And so you can do a 30-day lease on 10 different cell phones, and then, have the cell phone company program at least an area code, if not an area code, and then the first three digits of the number that is the same as the organization. And,
Gotcha.
and then you're off and running to the races that way as well.
Okay. The leader of the nonprofit or the director of development, whoever's in charge of fundraising and who's setting this up, should they be listening in to some of the calls, all of the calls at the beginning, none of the calls? What is the way to help our callers be more successful by, in a positive way, providing some accountability?
Our ability to be able to monitor the phone call is absolutely huge. We don't want to record it because recording takes two-party verification,
Right.
and so monitoring gets us that one side verification. We let the callers know that they may be monitored, and life is good. The ability to hand out that positive feedback, and we couch it as such. I have the ability to listen in on your calls. This is not Big Brother or Big Sister. I'm not trying to catch you doing anything, or have a get you moment or a gotcha moment, but instead I'm here to hear the nuances and hear the voice inflections in the prospect, and then be able to give you some tips and feedback and advice. Maybe they were done talking 5 minutes before you were, but you didn't pick up on their verbal and nonverbal cues. So, me being able to hear both sides can then give you some guidance and tips on how to be better during your next call. And that's how we couch that. Now, most homegrown programs don't have that ability to listen in. That comes through an automated calling software platform. But if we do have that ability, we definitely want to use it.
Right. I'm wondering about evaluating success. So in digital fundraising, we often evaluate success if we ran a bunch of ads for acquisition, and 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 the donations covered the ad spend. And so we're not revenue positive, but we're not revenue negative.
Right.
We've acquired donors at cost. That would be a huge success. In a phonathon situation, and let's not talk about acquisition for a second. Let's just talk about like what you call SciBunts and LIBunts, like just calling people in our database. What is success?
Again, it depends on what the organization is going to measure success as. Maybe I run a phonathon that cost me $10,000 in setup and equipment and salaries, and I don't raise one dime, but I had 983 conversations. I updated 600 mailing addresses. I got 300 emails for the organization. And well, that was a data cleanse, and that was an amazing opportunity to connect with nearly 1,000 people. I'll call it a win.
Right.
There are other organizations out there that are going to say, oh, if I don't at least make $1 for every dollar I'm spending, it's not worth it. At which point you're going to have to call some pretty lucrative folks, because let's be honest, salaries, this is the most expensive way to raise money. Over digital technology, over direct mail, over anything else, this is the most expensive way. And so, we've got to make sure that whatever our goals are match up with, what our anticipated ROI is going to be.
Right. So it is the most expensive way, but the case for support is it is the most personal way that builds a relationship quicker than anything else. And what's the effect on lifetime value?
Oh, I think it's immeasurable. And that's not just because I'm living with colored glasses, having done this for 30 years.
Right.
I nearly every single day of my life, I get to hear conversations between callers and between prospects. And the prospect's ability to sort of wax nostalgic about why they love the organization and why they're involved, and have this delightful conversation, and then be able to give advice from one human to another. Oh my gosh, I experienced this in my past, and you want to do X, Y, and Z. When they hang up the phone, and we very much train callers every single time we're in front of them, the number one goal is not making money. The number one goal is not getting a gift. The number one goal of the phone call is to leave the prospect feeling good.
Ooh.
And if you laser focus in on that goal, and you laser focus in on, by gosh, when they hang up this phone, they're going to have a smile on their face, and they're going to think that there's some pretty neat things happening at this organization, everything else will fall into place on its own.
Right. So when you're looking at your charts and you're expecting to see the hockey stick chart that goes right and up, maybe adjust that to just being like this big smiley face. That's what you're going for.
There you go.
Okay. Well, this has been fantastic, Clinton. We often say on the show that you have a duty of care to call your donors and to reach out to them and to build meaningful, lasting relationships, to get to know them for who they are, see them for who they are, understand them for who they are. And I think this is a fantastic way of that strategy. So thanks for spending some time with us today. The last question that we ask every single guest on this show is, do you have just a word of encouragement for anybody listening to the show? These are folks who are fundraisers, marketers, communicators, nonprofit leaders who are doing the hard work day in, day out of building good in our world.
Oh my gosh. Just know that every single touch point cumulatively adds up. And so while you feel maybe that communication, that solicitation, that touch point didn't make a difference, it absolutely did. And over the course of the year and over the course of the decade and that turn into decades that you're interacting with those potential donors, it all adds up to something wonderful.
Where can people find you if they want to know more, if they want to get maybe into the world of thankathons, radiothons, phonathons, if they want to know about your company and just follow your insights? Where can people find you?
Absolutely. So I work for LEAD, and our website is leadphilanthropy.com. And there's an opportunity there to request information, and I'd be more than happy to connect.
All right. Well, thanks again, Clinton.
Thank you. You have a lovely rest of your day, Mike.